worship His holy name and sing like never before. Oh, my soul, I worship Your holy name. You're rich in love and You're slow to anger. Your name is great and Your heart is kind. For all Your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Oh, bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship His holy name and sing like never before. Oh, my soul, I worship Your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come. Oh, still my soul sing Your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Oh, forevermore. Oh, bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh, my soul, I worship Your holy name. Oh, bless the Lord, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh, my soul, I worship Your holy name. Oh, I worship Your holy name. Lord, I worship Your holy name. And sing like never before. Oh, my soul, I worship Your holy name. Oh, I worship Your holy name. Lord, I worship Your holy name.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us for worship this morning. Hey, you might notice I'm in a different location. I'm standing in our In Gear community cycling workshop. Here at In Gear, which is a nonprofit part of Hillspring, we provide transportation to those in need in the community through a bike, and people donate bikes, we refurbish them, we provide helmets, and also we educate especially students in the area with safe biking habits as well as minor repairs. So if you're cleaning out your garage this spring, you might have a bike to get rid of, bring it on over. Or you need something to do, we'll take volunteers as well. So thanks for joining us this morning, and let's get back to worship.
When I consider what You have made, consider what you have done. I see your suffering, I see your scars, and all the wonder you saw the love, my Lord, my God. Oh, I stand in awe. Oh, I stand in awe. Oh, I stand in awe of you. So I stand in awe. Oh, I stand in awe. Oh, I stand in awe of you. In all glory, all honor, is all worship and all my praise. All blessing, all power is yours. All glory, all honor, and all worship and all my praise. All blessing, all power is yours. So the power is yours. Oh, I'm standing on. Oh, I'm standing on. So I'm standing on of you. We standing on you, Lord. Oh, I'm standing on. Oh, I'm standing on. Oh, I'm standing on of you. 'Cause the riches of this world will fade, the treasures of our God remain. So here I empty myself to all this world, nothing, and find everything in you. The riches of this world will fade. Oh, the treasures of our God remain. And here I empty myself to all this world, nothing, surrender, I surrender all to you, Lord. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you.
Hi everybody, so glad you joined us online today. I am Jeremy and I'm delighted to once again share this week's announcements with you. As you can see, I am out here at Eastgate Elementary right now. It's one of our mobile markets. We've given away 300 meals again today. It's just awesome. It's just awesome to be part of this community out here doing God's work, being the hands and feet. You know, it's so exciting to encourage you guys to come back into church as we open the doors back up and you guys continue to get shots and things are just opening up again. I'm delighted to tell you that Palm Sunday, the 28th of March, on Palm Sunday, we're opening up our downstairs to our children again. Our Sunday school is open back up. We are so excited to have the kids back in here. Grimelda, is there anything else I'm forgetting?
Well, we have been cleaning and organizing all the downstairs, and one thing I noticed that we need toys.
We need toys. I mean, how much more fun can you have? We need toys. So if you guys could bring something in. We're looking for kids, toddlers to fifth grade, educational toys. Trevor said he might need one of the new Xboxes. Whatever you guys are willing to give, we're willing to take. And we're just looking forward to having you guys back again. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Hillspring family. I'm Eric Patterson.
And I'm Lorelei Patterson.
We're going to do today's scripture reading from 1 Samuel. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan was very fond of David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before.
So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord. The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town.
Good morning, Hillspring Church family. Thank you so much for joining us online today as we, kind of continue this march towards Easter through Lent, as we've been, sort of skipping over parts of David's life, dipping our toes in at different aspects to see, how that informs on us. Because David was the most human of characters. Whether you want to call him noble and a man after God's heart and just this beautiful image of faith, or a murderous adulterer and everything in between, David wraps all of that up in his life. And today we're going to talk about one of the things that made David the greatest, and that was his relationships. and his friendships with people. And in particular, we're going to talk about him and Jonathan. But before we get to there, I'm going to give a bit more context, right? I mean, Brian started talking last week about how David was a man of righteousness who trusted God explicitly. And even when Saul, who in chapter 24 of 1 Samuel from last week, is chasing David with his men and has the and is trying to kill him, David gets the opportunity to kill him back. He comes into the cave to relieve himself, and David sneaks up behind him and, spares his life. And then comes out and says, look, I'm innocent. Now, Saul says, you're right. And he acknowledges for the first time there that David's going to be the next one on the throne. But that wasn't the first person in Saul's family to do it. The first was Jonathan. Up until Jonathan and David meet, which is what we're going to start talking about today and then on from there in chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. Up until then, Jonathan was sort of the guy that everybody loved, right? He was the pretty boy of Israel. He was the heir apparent. He was the prince. He was deeply well respected. In fact, it says that, at one point in time where he was in danger of possibly getting killed because he'd broken an oath, like the army steps up and says, no, we must save him. And there's this sense of, we love Jonathan, and he's our champion. In fact, his exploits are legendary throughout this whole time as he's fighting the Philistines. And then we come to chapter 18, which we talked about 2 weeks ago, chapter 17, where David fights Goliath. And at the end of chapter 17, right, David has just put on the armor, or has just killed Goliath and has brought his head back to Saul. He's said, I don't want to wear your armor because it doesn't fit me and it's not my style. And he brings Goliath's head to Saul, and he says, basically, he implies this was your responsibility. Now, he's much more gracious than that, but Saul was called by God to defeat the Philistines, and he'd been cowering in fear, and David shows up and defeats this guy. And there's this really interesting exchange that immediately happens. Because, it was Saul's responsibility to defeat Goliath and cause the Philistines to flee. But Jonathan was also there, and he didn't do it either. I mean, his exploits of, taking on a garrison of Philistines by himself and leading successful battles, Jonathan's sitting on the sidelines as well. And as David comes up with Goliath's head, it says he's still holding it, which is kind of creepy if you think about it. He's holding Goliath's head. And it says, that he's introduced to Saul and lauded and given praise. And then 1 Samuel 18, starting in verse 1, says this. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David and his armor, and even his sword and his bow and his belt. Then David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army, and all the people and even the servants of Saul approved. Reading into this context, there's this sense of, so David's here, and then Jonathan comes, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, you're amazing, you're incredible, like, I love you, and they put this covenant together, and they say, I'm binding you to me and me to you. And we'll get into talking about what a covenant looks like and the Hebrew word has said, but basically Jonathan sees this young man who has just done the duty that both his father and he were supposed to do. And he walks up to him and he takes off his robe and his armor and his sword and his bow and his arrows and his belt, and he gives them to David. This is in no uncertain terms, a political move. This is an acknowledgement that David is fulfilling the calling that Saul and he has. And he is in some ways saying, you are the better warrior, and maybe hinting at, we don't know for sure, but maybe hinting at that someday David would be the next ruler. There's this sense of David stepping into the place. And the amazing thing about Jonathan is he recognizes it. He gives David that acknowledgement, and he owns it. Not only, though, is this a political statement, but this is a deeply personal one. Because he ties his life through covenant together with David. In fact, the word there, nikwashera, is to tie together, to bind. And it's actually similar back in Genesis 44 when Judah says that he's made an oath to protect his brother Benjamin, right? He ties his life to Benjamin. And so, of course, there's the political implications of it, but it was also a deeply personal statement of friendship and relationship that we see play out from here forward. This was definitely a friendship of give and take, right? It was not it was not just because it was politically convenient or because they got something out of it. There was an arrangement and a realization of friendship, which is huge, even to the point of being willing to sacrifice. And here is a major contrast between the way Saul ran relationships and people and the way Jonathan or David did. Saul used people. I mean, he treated people as a means to an end. Oh, David's a good warrior, I'll bring him on and put him in charge. Or I'm having sickness or overcome by evil spirits, whatever that means. And David's going to play the lyre and calm him down. In fact, it says in 1 Samuel 16 that Saul loved David, but his love was for his own gain, not for the sake of David. And this is hugely different. Because David, we see, on the other hand, simply loves people. And people in return love him back. In fact, it says in 1 Samuel 18, like 6 times that David is loved. I mean, he is loved by Jonathan twice in the first beginning part there. He's loved by later his wife, before she becomes his wife. And he's loved by the troops, and he's even loved by the servants of Saul. I mean, David is somebody who is deeply cared about and loved by the people around him. Because it's also reciprocal. It's amazing, if you follow David's story, how often he cares for the people around him, whether they're his enemies like Saul, or whether they're his closest friends. I think sometimes in our country, and in our friendships and relationships, we're not really good at this. I think sometimes we treat our relationships and value them based on what they give us. And we learn this early. Personally, an embarrassing story. When I was in high school, I wasn't a particularly popular kid my junior year, but I was okay. I was on the soccer team and I had a decent amount of friends. But I also was this nerdy guy that played this card game called Magic the Gathering, right? It doesn't matter. But you get together and it was what the nerds did. And I played this card game. And there was this one really obnoxious, annoying guy named Chris, who actually had some money and had a bunch of really good cards. And he didn't really know much about the value of them. And so I would trade with him. And we would play together, and I'd go over to his house. He started inviting me over to his house after school, and we'd hang out, and we'd play cards and whatever. But he was this totally nerdy guy. And I remember one day at the end of, being at his house, I tried to make a trade with him or something, and he was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. And told me no. And I remember leaving his house thinking, well, what's the point of me being his friend anymore? Like, he won't trade with me. He won't basically pay me for being his friend. How despicable. Now, hopefully, none of you have ever just flat out said, that person's not going to give me anything or what I want, so I'm not going to cut them off anymore, or I'm going to cut them off and not be friends with them anymore, like I did. But there is a place where we treat people around us as a commodity, isn't there? You see, this is the opposite of how David and Jonathan were. They truly committed to each other. And I wonder if maybe the fact that we don't truly commit to each other is part of the reason friendship in America has some pretty sad statistics. I was reading a report the other day on the state of friendship in America, and it was from 2013, but it said that 75% of people are not satisfied with their friendships, and 63% are not confident in them. In fact, the study goes on to say, we've sort of misaligned ourselves with what's important. But they say, the things that we actually deeply value and need in our friends are not the things we think. I mean, they don't care all across the demographics of race and gender and geography and whatever. Most people want friends who are loyal, who are good people, and who will be there for them in a crisis. In fact, the things that are least important are physical attractiveness, similar political views, and similar religious views, which I find really reassuring for our church because we have so many people with such radically different political views. You can still make friends with somebody. And in fact, odds are they don't really care that much. Because really, what we are looking for in friends is people who will come alongside of us and say, I'm with you. I love you. I care about you. And you matter more than me. We are looking for people to love us. And friendship in that sense is a significantly unique thing because it's a commitment to someone that is not necessary, right? It's not even necessarily expected or socially demanded. Like if I get married, there's a strong social commitment that I connect with my wife and I stay in relationship with her, right? She does something that makes me mad or I do something that makes her mad. There's a strong expectation that we will reconcile and stay together. The thing about friendship is those expectations aren't there. I mean, in fact, my 4 or 5 closest friends don't live anywhere near me, right? I mean, they're people that I stay connected to, but I wouldn't have to. I mean, if I quit reaching out to people or connecting with them, they would go away and the world wouldn't care. Not the same with a relationship or with family, right? And this idea of friendship is incredibly important because it helps define who we are. I mean, in many ways, it's how David was successful because he was a deeply loved friend to many throughout his whole life. I mean, even when his son Absalom turned on him, David loved him and grieved. Which brings me to one of the 3 things that we learn out of this. And I'm not a 3-point sermon kind of guy, but it just was sort of there. And so you get 3. You can write them down if you want, whatever. But there's 3 aspects of friendship here. And the first is that we see right there in chapter 18 that there was a strong commitment to do life together. Like to each other. Like even when they were separated or even when they were on opposite sides of the political arena or when they were on opposite sides of family relations and tensions and difficulties, they deeply were committed to each other. And the second one was that they openly and honestly communicated to each other about their love and appreciation. that they were blunt about where they were at, how they felt about the other person. And the third was they were willing to bear the cost of the friendship. That even when things were hard and uncomfortable and the friendship cost them greatly, they were willing to endure it. They were willing to put each other over the cost. Which hopefully sounds an awful lot like the agape version of love out of the New Testament. Because that honestly is what true friendship is. So, talking about those three things, David and Jonathan were hallmarked by this covenantal commitment to each other. And this is where I said that word hesed was going to come up. It's kind of hard to translate because hesed is, well, it's one of those words that has a whole bunch of different meanings that doesn't equally, translate into a word in English, right? Like peace or shalom. It has a ton of nuance. But it's the word, and we translate it covenant or loving faithfulness or steadfast love, loving kindness, loyalty. It's how God treated the Israelite people. I mean, he bound himself in covenant, in hesed, to them. Meaning that their fate was now intertwined with his. And this is what David and Jonathan do on at least 3 occasions that we see. I mean, there's the one right at the beginning of Samuel 18, 1 Samuel 18, where Jonathan covenants with David, like, I will walk with you, I'm going to recognize you for who you are, and I will be with you. And then there's a covenant that Jonathan and David swear to each other to show kindness to their descendants. In fact, David's fleeing Saul at this point, and Jonathan is still saying, you're going to be king someday. Just remember my children and my family line. And they covenant together to honor each other. And then the third time they make this covenant is in 1 Samuel 23. Where David is fleeing with his men from Saul, and it says that basically David was afraid and scared, and somewhere out of the blue, Jonathan shows up, and he encourages him, and he says, my father will not kill you. God has a plan for you, and I want you to know I'm on your side, and I'm with you. Their relationship was really messy. The world around them was crazy. And in fact, there was a number of times where they just, were going to be stuck in situations where they couldn't reconcile, right? Saul's trying to kill him, and Jonathan can't leave, and David has to flee. But they were committed to each other above everything else. And that's what made their friendship so amazing. And I think there's something huge in this because, well, as I've said multiple times, God's economy is always relationship. There is this place where we say to people, you are loved and I'm in. Even if life, maybe even you, get a little wonky. Now, of course, David doesn't make that covenant with everybody. It's a special few. But it's those that he binds his life to. Jonathan binds his life to say, regardless of what happens, I'm in. The second thing that they do really well is they openly and honestly communicated their affection, their loyalty, and their commitment to each other. Right? I mean, I love you. I bind myself to you. You are like my soul, kind of an idea. And I got to say, does that at all seem weird to you? I mean, as Americans, we really, really struggle to be totally open and honest with how we feel about other people. And I'll say, particularly as men, but just in general. Both in a positive sense, like saying, man, I love you. You are amazing. You make my soul happy. And also in a negative sense, like, yeah, you're a great person, but, I'm not there. It's interesting. I was reading a Psychology Today article, And I was talking about a German foreigner who had come to the U.S. and was living here permanently. And she was, at work with her coworker, and her coworker referred to her as a friend. And she responded, "You're not my friend. You're an acquaintance. I mean, we go out to coffee and we chit-chat a bit. That's not friendship." And of course, they went on to say that this didn't go over well. And I would imagine it wouldn't in your world if somebody said, "No, we're not friends. We're kind of acquaintances." Because we have this cheap value of friendship in our world. And we're not willing to say, "No, that's not friendship," or, "Man, I love you deeply." In fact, I think sometimes it makes us uncomfortable. For those of you who've been following here, you know my dog, Mackay, who I'd had for over 11 years, died suddenly and tragically. And as I took her home from the vet, I was down in Silverton, Oregon, where one of my best friends lives, Ryan Murphy. I called him and I said, "I'm going up to my parents' house. I'm going to bury Mackay." And he said, "I'll be right there." So he kind of wrapped up some things with his family and left and came up. And I was standing there as he pulled into the driveway, and he just walked up to me and I just started crying. And I remember thinking at the time, is this okay? Like, this is weird, right? But at the same time, he just held me. And this is a guy who's one of the most respectable and tough and amazing men I know. And yet he just held me as I sobbed. And I thought, that's friendship. It's intimacy. It's a willingness to let me be me in all aspect of it. And that's what I see in what David and Jonathan were doing. Of course, like I said, sometimes that makes us uncomfortable. In 2 Samuel 1, after Saul and Jonathan and the other two sons are killed in battle, David writes a song of lament. And he finishes this song writing about how, Saul and Jonathan have fallen and Israel has lost. And he closes it with a really personal refrain. And he says, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were such a friend to me. Your love for me was more wondrous than the love of women." Now, even my wife looked at me when I read that and went, right? Because we do that. And in fact, there is kind of a small group of people, theologians and otherwise, that would say, "Oh, look, David and Jonathan must have been gay. Like, they declare their love for each other. David was a harpist," and, so on and so forth. Well, I don't know. The text is very intentionally non-explicit on that. It doesn't say it one way or other. There's no indication there was anything sexual with that. So we'll leave that to the annals of history or, God to sort out. But it does speak to two things about our society I think we need to be aware of. One is, we bring to the Bible what we want to bring and look for ways to validate it, right? I mean, people who want to say that David and Jonathan were gay can read that scripture and say, "See, look, it looks like evidence to me." And the flip side, the people who say, "There's no way anybody in the Bible could ever have been gay if they were following God," pull other scriptures or turn that away. But it's not just in these kind of situations, is it? I mean, how often do we hear people talk about the prosperity gospel and, if only you put your hand up and send in this faith offering, God will heal you or give you something. Or, fill in the blank on all the political ways that our scripture is twisted. We read into scripture very easily what we want to hear. And that should be a huge caution for us. The other second danger I think we see pointed out in this, and I think this is a true, this is condemning of American understanding of friendship. And as we over-sexualize it, particularly for men, but both for men and women, that we sexualize friendship and intimacy. We have a hard time with guys being genuinely connected to each other, intimate, friends, and acknowledging that. You know, David's exploit with women were, well, legendary at best. I mean, he was married with at least 7 women. He had a side chick in Bathsheba, Bathsheba, and he had over 20 kids, so on and so forth. He was definitely a sexual being. But this connection with Jonathan was never written in those terms. He was just simply saying, this is a person that I love deeply, more so than women. Now, what does he mean by that? Honestly, it's probably a commentary on the state of ancient Middle East, right? I mean, David's lament on this probably speaks more to how they saw women, right? I mean, the only reason you got married there was to perpetuate your family line and to have children. And, you know, or you kind of had a bunch of illicit affairs to satisfy your lust. Like most of the love for women either had to do with duty or lust. And here was Jonathan, who he'd lain in the trenches with and gone to battle with, and had this deep sense of bonding with him. I think we need more of those kind of relationships in our world. Relationships where we can say, I deeply love you and appreciate you for who you are. I had an interesting experience of that when I was in college. One of my friends and best friends from high school was up at college here at Whitworth. And I came up to spend time with him, and while we were there, we went to this concert. Now, my friend Dimitri is Ukrainian, and he'd been in the U.S. About 5 or 6 years, probably about 5 years at this point in time. And so we went to this concert together, and while we were sitting there listening to the music and whatever, he reached over and he held my hand. And I remember sitting there in the chair like, what in the world is going on? This is weird. But then I realized he was just saying he loved me and he appreciated the moment and that we were there together. And it was beautiful. And in fact, Dimitri and I have shared a lot of lives. I mean, we played soccer together, so we've showered together. There's been times we've been on vacation or traveling, we've shared a bed together. Like, there's this sense of commitment and relationship with each other that takes down a lot of those social walls. And you know what? Neither one of us are gay. Not even a little bit. We just simply value each other and are okay expressing it. It does bring me, though, to the third point of friendship. And friendship is not easy, and it always costs greatly. You know, if Dimitri had reached out and held my hand and I'd been like, what the heck? There would have been a huge cost to that for him. Of course, that's a small little thing. I mean, in the case of David and Jonathan, right? Like, David literally put his life in Jonathan's hands multiple times. And if Jonathan had betrayed him or sided with his father, he would have been killed. As well as, Jonathan literally gave him his cloak on multiple times and said, I know you're going to be king and I'm not going to be, the throne should be mine, but it's not going to be, it's going to be yours. And so I'm going to give up my right to support you. And in this, we see this incredibly important aspect of friendship, that it costs us greatly. I mean, you will never have a relationship that costs you more than your closest friends, maybe your spouse. Like, the hardest conversations I have had in my life have oftentimes been with friends where I said, I'm disappointed in that, or you failed me on this, or I really screwed up, or I betrayed you, or I should have listened to you, or so on and so forth, right? It costs us time and effort and energy and no small amount of pride to be a good friend, to let others speak into our lives and to speak into theirs. And our world wants to push this into this sort of fluffy, oh, we're friends because we go and hang out and we do coffee and we, whatever we do, build stuff together or fill in the blank for yourself. But true relationships cost. I think it's part of the reason so few of us have them. You know, it's interesting. Jesus gives his disciples a new commandment as he's about to die and leave them. And he says, "A new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. And no greater love has this than a man lay down his life for his friends." In other words, Jesus said being a friend is going to cost you, and literally it cost him everything. And yet that's our commandment. And I hope we take that to heart. Because when we're found in this place between, in relationships where we have deep loyalty, where we're willing to express affection and go out of our way to let others know how much they mean to us, and we're willing to pay the cost, incredible things happen. I'll close with this story. About 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I made a really good friend named Matt Stone. He and I worked together and lived together for a while, and we had this great relationship. And through a series of circumstances, him getting jobs or moving, or me moving to Hawaii, and just life, right? We don't get to spend a whole lot of time together. We don't get to talk a whole lot. We talk on the phone a little bit. We're not really phone people, so on and so forth. Well, I found out a few weeks ago that my father has stage 4 cancer. And I called Matt up out of the blue. And I said, I want to tell you what's going on. And he said, can I get a plane ticket to come visit you? And he said, I don't know if you need somebody to talk to. I don't know if you need a distraction. I don't know what you need, but can I come up there? And it reminded me of something he had told me 20 years ago. He said, if I have 5 people in my life that I know no matter what is going on, they will drop anything, sacrifice anything to come and help me, I know I will never be alone, and there's nothing I can't do. And back then, he and I committed to that. Fast forward a couple decades, and he's showing up here on Friday. I am a much, much richer person because of his friendship, because of his loyalty, because of his ascend. And I hope and I pray that you have people like that in your life. And even more, I hope and I pray that you are that person in others. As we go into this last song, would you worship with me and ask God, who are you commanding me to love as you loved us? Let's worship.
Let it be Jesus, first name that I call. Let it be Jesus. 'cause there's no other for me. To live is Christ. It's for me. To live is Christ. God, I breathe your name above everything. Let it be Jesus. Let it be Jesus. Should I ever be abandoned? Should I ever be acclaimed? Should I ever be surrounded by the fire and the flame? There's a name I will remember. There's a name I will proclaim. Oh, let it be Jesus. Let it be Jesus. Let it be for me. To live is Christ. For me, to live is Christ. Oh God, I breathe your name above everything. Let it be Jesus. Let it be Jesus. Let it be for me. To live is Christ. Oh, for me, to live is Christ. God, I breathe your name above everything. Oh, let it be Jesus. Let it be Jesus. Let it be Jesus.
There is nothing God can't conquer, isn't there? He is in control. He has the ability to change the circumstances or the situations, and not just in the world around us, but in us. And so I pray as you go into this week that you would surrender to Him for what He has for you. That you would use Him to find the courage to connect with others, to love well and unashamedly. And that you would commit out of loyalty and faithfulness, even when it's not easy, to the right people. Let me pray. God, thank you so much for this calling, for this opportunity, this chance to worship you, but also to learn. And God, I pray as we go into this week that you would lead us to the relationships that you want us to mutually find value in, to commit to each other, to love, to sacrifice, and to serve you. Go with us this week. In your name I pray. Amen. Go this week and be a friend. God bless.